Hello, good morning to my African friends all over the world. Um, Once again, we are here and it's nice to be with you again. I really enjoy talking about this. It's probably something I never thought I would enjoy this much, and I do. I just want to say hello to you, and I hope all of you are fine wherever you are. Um, and I thank you. I thank God for all your lives, even listening. May you be blessed. Um, let's continue talking about this book. Thank you, Mrs.G, which you can find on Amazon and on Author House websites for those who are in the US. The last time I touched a little bit on languages and how we should be confident with our languages. Actually, in this book, there is a chapter, European languages. And I just want to say that the language thing is kind of a thread that runs through the book. So in all the chapters, I kind of mention it in some way. I'll tell you why in a minute, why I mention that because the language and culture thing is very much central to most of what's going on, and it's central to the brainwashing as well. Um, I just want to say, you know, for us in southern Africa, the person that was sent to us was Cecil Rhodes, and he has online when you go and type confession of faith, you will find his confession of faith, which he said, I think it's in 1887 or something. And part of it is that uh, he said, I contend that we are the most superior race, as in whites. And this is something that he stood on that. Just for you to understand how important it is to be determined to do something. He left, I think he was 17 years old when he left the UK to go out there. And I think up to now, he still owns the diamond mine in South Africa, uh, or, his, or his descendants do. But then let's talk about the fact that that was the premise for us to be brainwashed. And we were told that they came to civilize us, to make us, because we were a despicable, he says, in his own words, despicable human beings. So they came to civilize us. But I want to tell you today that that is the biggest lie ever told. You will hear that, oh, colonization was to civilize us. That is the brainwashing version of it. Colonization started because of the industrial revolution that was going on here in Europe, and they needed the resources, our resources. So even though there was trading before then, but they needed our resources, and they obviously, after a while, after coming in and staying there for a bit, they decided they were going to colonize us and own our land so that they're able to access the resources wherever they want. And I'll tell you how painful it is when you look at it. I'm not telling you to stay in that pain, but I'm telling you so that you can be motivated to be able to stand up for your ancestors. I'm trying to explain to you what they went through so that you are able to stand on their shoulders and be able to say, I want to stand for them. Even biblically, it was all about, standing up for the heritage of the Jews. So greatness comes with that. If you look at the English heritage, you can trace back the monarchy to about 960 years. And that's their strength. And of course, they took that from us. What happened was that they needed the resources, so they came and when they came to our land to brainwash us, first of all, I want to say to you, do not be fooled. You can look at the African American and feel sorry for them. They lost their names, they lost their, the place, they don't know where they come from. But then you have to know the same mindset that started slavery is the same mindset that actually after slavery was abolished, it became a different thing. Okay. Slaves were taken from Africa. And of course, they'll tell you slavery was already always there. It was. But slaves were treated as part of the family, you know, paying the debt, and it was finite. You didn't live your lifetime to not change. You were not a slave for a lifetime. There was a time where you were let go. So I want to say that this enslavement meant that people were taken away, displaced, and up to now that is the largest forced uh, migration of people ever in history. And they were taken to a land that is so cold. I mean, can you imagine? Africa is warm, and they went there cold, and of course, about 2 million died and drowned in the Middle Passage. But I'm just touching on slavery, but this is not my main. It's colonization, of course. And they went there, and of course, they were really chattels. They were not human. They were property, you know. It's only in 1870 that they were included in a census. Before that, they were part of the animal. They were part of if a farmer was taking all his animals and his assets, he would count slaves. So they were not in the census until 1870. Okay, let's leave that. So they were displaced. They did not know who they were. They just were given names of their masters and all that. But then think about the reverse. Something similar happened with colonization. What happened with colonization is that they came, changed our whole environment. And you have to remember that we had ecosystems that preserved our environment. And up to now, the environmentalists who still argue that colonization was part of why the global warming that we're getting to now, that preservation, because all those, people they thought were primitive were actually preserving their ecosystem environment. They had that. They had the skills. So when they came, they built all over. Okay. This was driven by greed, wanting to make money. This is capitalism, imperialism. Okay. So everything was changed. So if you look at some towns in Harare, in Zimbabwe and everything, you will see that there are towns as well. Salisbury was there, Salisbury capital, there's a Salisbury here. So basically they were building an environment that was familiar to them, discounting the people that were there. So the reason why they say they discovered is so that we do not actually, is to brainwash us to believe that it's a nice thing. But then the truth about it is that it was a reconstruction of what was there. They actually destroyed what was there and built. It wasn't a reconstruction, sorry, it was a construction, erected their own things, what was familiar to them as environment, everything. So suddenly, the people that were there, my grandfather and all of them, they found themselves in a different environment. They found themselves in an environment that had a language they did not understand. Suddenly, their wisdom didn't matter anymore. Their wisdom became obsolete. The wisdom they thought was wisdom, suddenly they were uneducated, in quotes, but they were wise. And that wisdom became nothing. So what happened when everything was changed? The culture was changed. And of course, culture, language is a function of culture. So the language had to be changed. This is how we came to speak. This is how I came to speak like this. It's because of the fact that it was taken over. And when that happened, then it meant that we had to be educated. And that education is very much part of how we were brainwashed. Because what we called education was things that would brainwash us. Our heroes became villains, and their heroes became heroes. For a long time, Alexander the Great was one of my favorite. But I came to realize that they were heroes. Our heroes, were deleted. So it was an erasure of culture and language, completely erased who we are. That was the agenda. So they went to erase everything that we knew as fact and planted what would make us bow down to them. So our language changed. For those who have fathers who lived in the colonization, you would know that your father wanted you to be educated. He wanted, I don't know, some people were blessed enough to have fathers who were educated. Mine wasn't, and my mother was an educated woman. She was a trained nurse, but I believe he had a lot of wisdom. But if he had to express that wisdom in English in order for it to be valid, in order for it to be legitimate, in order for him to be listened, he had to express it in English. And if he didn't have the English, in the case of my father, he had very little English, it meant then that he would be counted as unwise. You can see how there, somebody said, if I have to kneel down for you to stand tall, then it must mean that you're not tall. Because then the truth about it is that erosion of culture, that richness. Did you know that some languages were actually became extinct? Languages became extinct, native languages, some of them. When you think about it, I'll give you an example of the Cameroon. The Cameroon, first of all, how did the Cameroon become two countries? The Cameroon, 1884, most of you know about the Berlin Conference where 14 countries all sat down with Otto Bismarck and decided and sliced Africa into pieces of who owns what. This is how I came to speak English, because my part of the cake was given to the British, So when it came to Cameroon, the Cameroon was divided into English and French. The painful part of it is that when they got their independence, I think the western part wanted to be part of Nigeria for a while because they spoke English, and then the other part French. But you see, these were a people who were divided. And when they got their independence, they were dividing themselves. They want to divide themselves based on the same very thing that, languages that divided them. I mean, I didn't understand that, but that was, what happened. They were trying to decide which side do they go to, Nigeria, do they go to the French side? And these were a people before that. And it's sad because sometimes the line was divided and it didn't matter to them. It was just, how they mostly was what was easier to rule. So the opposite happened to Nigeria, which was, tribes that were never really lived together were actually put together. So Nigeria was not Nigeria before, and and the people still today, there's a group that feels that they don't want it to be Nigeria anymore. They want it to be separated. So all those things were done to brainwash, to erode culture, to erode what was there before. So now when you speak English, you speak French, you speak any language, European language, with pride, just remind yourself that what you're doing, you're perpetuating something. I'm not saying you don't speak English. I'm not saying you don't speak it with pride. It's wonderful to have a lot of languages. But when you speak it and look down on people who don't, you are perpetuating colonization. You are feathering the agenda that made us, that divided us, that eroded our culture. So I was one of those people. I'll be laughing at people. Uh, in my country where I come from, our vice president, doesn't speak English that well. And it's a source of, laughter for people. It's a comical thing, you know. They laugh about it. It is sad because if our ancestors were here and looking at us, they fought to hold on to their culture. And you're here perpetuating it, belittling people who still don't understand that language. Your forefathers did not know that language. They were called stupid because they could not learn it. Access to education here now is through European languages. And I remember in class, I think everybody remembers in class, laughing at the kids that are, that could not speak English or, I don't know, wherever you are. There's a man who said he remembers when he was little and when he went into class that the teacher was speaking and he was quiet. He was quiet. He's a Cameroonian man because he did not understand anything that was being said. So the point is this: your intelligence was measured with the spoken English, spoken European language stick, which is not true. When you speak the language well, it does not mean that you're more intelligent than those who don't speak it. It's very important for us to know that because the knowledge that they have, if you care to listen in their language, you might be surprised that they know more than you. Of course, learning languages is good. It makes us, there's a lot of books written in English and all that. And French and all those things. I know. And so access to knowledge sometimes means you have to learn the language. But it's time we wrote books in our own languages. It's time we made forms that were the legal systems to be written in our own languages. Because it is unfair for somebody to go and stand in front of a legal system that is meant to be in their own country, but is judging them in a foreign country, in a foreign language. We have now to make it easier for those who are not educated, who cannot afford to be educated, to access the legal system, to access everything that they need to access. So, in chapter 3, page 34, I talk about the European languages, and I give an example of Ngugi at Wationgo. Yes, I don't know if I'm saying it right. It's Kikuyu. So a real powerful man. I really admire him. It's strange that while I was writing this book, that's how I discovered him and realized that he also wrote a book in 1986 about decolonization. It was very strange because I realized that, somehow what he said I related to. So I was just trying to research on languages and realized that he had actually wrote about decolonization as well. So I realized I'm sort of going in there. I've not read the book. I wanted to write a book that's my own, that I felt that the spirit, the spirit of God was putting inside of me. I did not want to make, so really I didn't read it, but it was interesting for me to watch an interview that he did on Hard Talk. It was very painful to watch that interview. The reason it was because I could see that the mindset of the journalist is still the same, the superiority mindset. He's talking to Ngugi, who has written books, and he was not given a Nobel Prize, and we know why. I talk in the book as well about in his 30 years, the Nobel, prize, whatever organization, has not given a non-English thing. Only five in its 30 years. Only five, and even those five writers, they had to be translated to English. So you can see that even though colonialism is gone, but neocolonialism is still there. There's a chapter as well. I touch up on neocolonialism in there. But he talks to painful to watch because he's trying to convince this guy that English is an African language. I could not. I sat there, watched this so many times, and I could not understand how so many years after independence, this guy is telling us English is an European, is an African language. And of course, Google told him, no, it's not, you know. And of course, they pride themselves with the fact that it was easier. It made us, we can now communicate with the rest of the world. But then they probably would have been other ways we would have communicated if that not had been. You cannot do an evil and say, oh, after all, this evil ended up being advantageous. And the advantages of colonization are, are very few, if at all. And most people will tell you the advantages. There are no advantages. There are just a few people from Africa who actually attack this. The Indians, these books that have been as written. I think one of them is Unglorious Empire or something like that. And the Asians are really digging down to see all the things that were done through colonization. And, of course, I won't go there. I'm just going to stick with Africa. But I was talking about how, Churchill actually let famine, people died. I don't know, 30 million Indians died when food was being diverted to the soldiers during the Second World War instead of the Indians. But those are the stories that we have to know. We are mature enough to take it and say, okay, it happened, but we need to know. Because then when you speak that language, you speak it knowing that your own is not necessarily inferior. It is so important to know that our languages are not inferior. Our culture is not inferior. So and And I, of course, in this chapter, chapter 3, which is European languages, as I told you, the language thing is a string that really binds the whole book, and I touch it on most of the chapters. So it's the culture and the language, which are the two things that really go hand in hand and function of each other, if you like. Um, so, and I talk as well about the Ghanaian prime minister who actually could not name his child long after, he was post-colonial prime minister, but he could not name his child in Catholic. He could not name it in his cultural language because he was told by the Catholic priest that no, that is a heathen. That is heathen, and it is amazing when you start reading and you just realize that when most of the heroes that you were told were heroes, they were not necessarily our heroes. Shakespeare, he was a literal genius, of course, but I'm sure we had other literal geniuses of his time in Africa, you know. But of course, that was eroded, and all those people, because Africa at the time, it was oral. The history was told orally, and once those people were killed and tortured and all that stuff, it means that, it stopped there. But let's, so of course, then Shakespeare was brought to us. And Ngugi talks about with this guy. He talks about the fact that even in Shakespeare's stories, you can see a tug of war of power. It is a power struggle there, which is really a symbol of the British. It's a power thing. It seems so important. He went through all the, Macbeth and all those stories that are told by Shakespeare, and he talks about the power struggle. And of course, we know that uh, uh, Romeo and Juliet is is anti-Semitic or whatever. But there's a lot of things that we took as fact and just actually literally fed on that are not necessarily true or not necessarily important to us as a people. So, that's chapter 3, and of course, uh, I go through in page 42. I talk about why language, and of course, language is intrinsic to to a people, a group of people. It communicates values. It communicates their state of mind. It communicates a lot of things, and a group of people who share a language have a lot in common. So it is something that is very important for any group of people, for a culture. So, of course, that had to be eroded for us to believe that we are despicable. That had to be eroded for us to believe that we did not know what we are doing. Because if you cannot communicate yourself in your own language, it's harder. And most times you keep quiet. I remember actually I had a great job in insurance company many years ago, and we used to have meetings once a week, you know. And although I was particularly very good at my job, I know that because when I was off, nobody could do my job for those two, whatever time I'm off. But when it came to meetings and we had to sit down, I had just, it was in Ireland. And I was very conscious of the fact that I spoke differently from everybody. So even if I had something to say, I would actually keep quiet. See the power of language? And I would actually keep quiet and I wouldn't say anything. So can you see why language, taking away and giving you a new language, can you see why it actually takes away your confidence? So it's important to know. So I wouldn't say anything. And I remember one day I said something, and there was someone who really felt, anyway, there was a friction. I had a friction with someone. And of course, they took that moment that day when I said something, and they laughed and said, "Oh, you finally said something." And everybody was laughing. And of course, I went back to saying nothing again. So you can see how language was a very powerful instrument for oppression. Very powerful. Because if you could not communicate what you wanted, if you had wisdom and you couldn't communicate, you had to shut up. And of course, stupidity was connected to the inability to speak the European languages, which is very, 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 as we know, very misleading. I'm going to stop here for now. But language is a very wide thing, and I could go on for all day actually because it's very powerful thing. But just know that the decision for you to speak that language was arrived at in Berlin, and your ancestors were not even consulted. So it was imposed on you, and so was a culture. So when you laugh at somebody who does not speak that language, remember that you are perpetuating an evil that was done against your own race, against your own nation. So think twice before you laugh. If you have to be proud of the fact that you're able to communicate, be proud because you have broadened your mind, but don't look down on those who can't. So I'll say for today that is all, and I'm looking forward to the next session. I always enjoy this because it's knowledge that we should really value, and it makes us stand tall. When you know who you are, you stand tall. You stand unapologetic to anybody, and know that you're a survivor of a great many evils that were done to your nation. So Africans should stand tall wherever they are, whether African Americans or we should stand tall and love the fact that we are still here. But let's not perpetuate the evil of these languages. Thank you very much. So for now, bye.